So you moved here from North Carolina for ILC.
Well,
Uh,
yeah, we lived here in Nashville before we moved to North Carolina, and we went out there. I did my master's degree at UNC,
okay,
and so we were really moving back here after that.
gotcha.
Yeah,
Nashville's such a cool place.
it is.
Although the Raleigh-Durham area is pretty nice too.
Love it. Really loved it out there. Yeah. I haven't
Everybody,
yet figured out. This is year one to really give it a try. Whether my allergies are.
everybody, welcome to an Integrative Life Center webinar, one of our first actually. And I'm here, my name is Corey, and I'm here with Mackenzie, who is the Director of Nutrition Services at Integrative Life Center. And we got to talk last night a little bit in prep for this, and I'm really excited about this, selfishly for me, because we're going to be talking about food, feelings, in quarantine. And the situation we find ourselves in right now is, I mean, if you're like me, it is not eating probably as well as I could. But some of the things we talked about last night in prep for this, Mackenzie just has such a great perspective and some expertise to share with us for how we can do it maybe even better. So Mackenzie, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do at ILC, what that means, Director of Nutrition Services?
Sure. So at Integrative Life Center, we are a mental health treatment center. We work with folks recovering from all sorts of mental health challenges, depression, anxiety. We really focus heavily on trauma. And then we treat substance abuse and eating disorders. And my background, and sex, love, relationship issues. My background as a dietitian, a registered dietitian, is in eating disorder treatment. And I've also worked in other mental health treatment centers in the past. And so I bring kind of the confluence of all of those expertise areas together, and I work directly with our clients on an individual basis, whether they are struggling with disordered eating patterns, full-blown clinical level eating disorders, emotional eating, and then also work with clients on some life skills as well. If someone is really struggling with their nutrition because they don't know how to cook, maybe we're going to start working on some cooking skills or meal planning skills to really integrate those back into life. And then I also run our Healing Foods program, which is our meal service program through the Pinewood Kitchen out in Nunnally, Tennessee. They cater microbiome friendly meals for our clients. And so it's a multifaceted role that I have, but it's great. I've really enjoyed being at ILC.
Well, I think this is such a great time to have you and sharing all of that with the broader public here. And then again, I'm going to say selfishly with me, being in quarantine for the last, I don't know what it feels like Groundhog Day. Every day is the same day over and over and over for like 3 or 4 weeks now. But I just don't, I as we were talking last night, I feel like there's some guilt and shame. Like I kind of kidded you and said, I don't want to put on my actual pants that don't have elastic bands because I have been, I just don't feel like I'm probably eating as well as I should. And so can we just start there and talk about, the guilt and shame and how to maybe navigate some of that, the foods and feelings part of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, Corey, you're absolutely not alone. And I have a feeling there are folks listening to the webinar today that are really resonating with what you're saying. And in the environment we're in all the time, not just in quarantine, there are so many messages out there about that food and the way we eat is a moralistic issue, and the foods we choose to eat or avoid eating really speak to who we are as people, and that can be a really dangerous message and really can just throw our guilt and shame around our food choices into such sharp relief. And so this right now is a time where we're all looking at social media and at the news to get updates on what's going on in the world, because it's a critical time to be in the news. And that also just increases our exposure to those messages that form more guilt and shame. So it really plays a really significant role in how we interact with food. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's such a difficult time. I mean, grocery shopping is tough, and there's some things that are, I kind of go to, like for me, I get in our pantry and I'm like, where's the Oreos, or where's the Heath bar, or whatever. I hid some of my kids' Halloween candy, so they didn't eat all the candy. So it's probably a little ripe, but I'm hitting those kind of things, and I'm like, instantly I just go, I'm eating it and go, this is, what am I doing? There's part of it that is, I know we're going to talk about like stress and boredom, but I don't know. I end up in the pantry, I'm looking up and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get the Heath bar and eat it. What tips can you help? I feel like you said, I'm not alone in that we're at home all of the time. And so it's tough to, when I went to my office, I don't have my pantry at my office. Now I'm actually in my daughter's room. This is my makeshift desk right now. And so I have access to the pantry and to the kitchen and everything that I don't have normally. And it's kind of tough.
Yeah, I think you're bringing up a good point here too, that we're in very different, most of us are in very different environments than we would normally find ourselves in. And so sometimes I think we start to beat ourselves up about acting differently around food than we normally would. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves saying, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep going into the pantry and picking out these foods that I know I don't feel super great after I eat them? But I think that we don't take it, considering the significant change that we've all experienced in our environments, I think that we just aren't taking that into account, that not only are we around different, food environments, but we've also got this big change that's happened, I think, for a lot of us in our level of stress. And that really comes in, I think, when we think about whether you're staying at home and not working because of a job change that you've experienced. I think that we think, okay, well, I'm at home, I'm not doing anything, I shouldn't be stressed, like I've got nothing going on. But if you're out of work, then of course you're stressed, and it's a different kind of stress than you experience on a day-to-day basis. Or if you're one of those people whose jobs has like really skyrocketed and you're busier than ever, then that's also a different level of stress than we've experienced before. And one thing that we can talk about is what our food cravings are really saying to us. And is that a direction you want to kind of dig into, Corey?
Yeah.
Let's interpret this a little bit.
I'm in my pantry and I'm looking, and we all have these little things. Like some days it's not just the Heath chocolate bar. Some days it's the Cheez-Its, which are down here. I'm looking exactly like in my mind down at these Cheez-Its. So yeah, what is that? What's behind all of that?
Absolutely. And so I want to first give credit to Dr. Anita Johnston. She's our Executive Director of Eating Disorders Programming here at Integrative Life Center. And she's really been a wealth of knowledge and information. She's helped me to boost my knowledge of how food and feelings connect. And she works with me, our therapists, and our clients as well on picking through these food messages and the ways that food works metaphorically. So let's look at how some different food cravings can be metaphorical for us.
I'll be your guinea pig.
Oh, go for it. Yeah. Let's talk about those Cheez-Its. You want to start with those?
Let's talk about the Cheez-Its. Yeah, okay. I'll be your guinea pig. I get a bowl, dump them in there. So I don't take the whole box, but I get a bowl and then I'll just, come back to my desk here and play. In fact, I'm surprised there's not a bowl sitting here of Cheez-Its crumbs.
Absolutely. So, and before we even dig into that, I also want to mention that it's really important to embrace our humanity in this moment too, because humans have, not only do we have stress and we have emotions, and that's what we're going to talk about here in a minute, but we also get hungry, and even if you're just sitting at home working from home, I think we kind of think like, well, if I'm not up and I'm not doing stuff, then I shouldn't really be so hungry all the time. But mental work takes a lot of energy too. And you may be hungrier than you normally are, even if you're less active. Or maybe you're one of those people who's really upped your fitness game in quarantine. So you're gonna, your appetite might be a little bit different than it was prior to quarantine. So really the first step here, if you're finding that you're craving a food, is to check in with your physical hunger. Am I hungry? And if you're hungry for food, physical hunger, and you want those Cheez-Its, then the Cheez-Its are just Cheez-Its. And it's just, at that point, you're just choosing a snack. What snack do I want to have? and you can kind of just put your regular thinking cap on for that one.
Yeah.
But if you're not physically hungry, if that's when you check in and you're like, nope, had a snack 20 minutes ago, no reason for me to be hungry, I'm not feeling any of those cues, then the question to ask is, what emotions are these foods triggering for? Not that the food is triggering emotions, but what are they cluing me into as far as emotions go? So your Cheez-Its, for example, and this is just a template to use. You could really, and I'll give you an example from my own life that to show you how to kind of dig into this a little bit more. But Cheez-Its they're crunchy and they're salty. And usually when we're craving crunchy, salty foods, it's a way to get out some unexpressed anger. If you think about salty, we've colloquialized that word too. When you're salty, you're like kind of ticked off.
Yeah.
So think about, am I feeling salty about something? Am I not expressing anger and resentment? Because the whole theme here is that sometimes our emotions, if we don't express them, we don't recognize them, we don't tune into them and do something with them, then they kind of like poke out in weird ways. And food is a way that they often tend to express themselves. So that's one thing to check in on. If you're one of those people, like you're saying, Corey, sometimes you're craving those Cheez-Its, some other times you're craving the Oreos, and that's a different experience. So let's also talk about those Oreos. I see we're all embracing our humanity, our human moments here.
This is quarantine life. I didn't tell everybody, but I've got two coworkers who are in school right now, and they're in the other room and sometimes come in while I have meetings. So they're disruptive coworkers. Okay, so Oreos.
Right. So your Oreos, that's a different food. It's doing something different for you as far as the flavors, the sensations that food is giving you. So Oreos are, these are questions for you to ask yourself about why you're wanting those Oreos. Is it because they're really chocolatey? Chocolate is one of those foods that we know this food from Valentine's Day. It's often associated with some unexpressed or unresolved need for sex, romance, or some sort of sensual connection. Sensual can mean it can honestly be as simple as engaging your senses. That's where that word comes from, is sensuality. So check in with yourself. Is that actually what you're seeking in that moment when you're turning to the Oreos? They're also a crunchy food. So maybe we go into that unexpressed anger or unexpressed resentments place. Maybe you're frustrated with your kids because they keep popping into your meetings. But it's easier to eat some Oreos than it is to have conflict with your family. Of course it is. And then Oreos are also really sweet. So sweet foods often are indicative of us not having enough sweetness in our life. Maybe it's that you don't feel like you're receiving enough sweetness and kindness from others, or maybe it's that you're not being very sweet to yourself. And I have a feeling that is running rampant in our world right now, is that we're not being very kind to ourselves. We're expecting ourselves to level up right now, when really some of us need to just try to be hanging on for dear life.
I love that. I want to come back to the leveling up part because there is that notion of, okay, well, if I have all this time, I should be leveling up. But I want to pause that for a second and come back to, I think what you shared here is so illuminating, that I didn't think about food as kind of an indicator of what emotions are kind of under the surface. And I think that's really, really helpful, because the whole self-awareness and awareness of emotion and acknowledgement of emotions, and using food as one of those indicators, I think is really powerful for us, because a couple of things just right there in your two examples. One is we're kind of contained, we don't have the freedom that we did to just kind of like, I'm going to go to the store, or my kids can go to school and play on the playground. And there is that when no matter how much we love each other, putting people in the same little confined space for an extended period of time. And that would make sense. Those times when I kind of go for those cheeses is like, hey, it's back-to-back meetings all day, which has happened, by the way. And on the Oreo side, I mean, again, it feels like my wife keeps saying it's Groundhog Day, because it feels like you don't know what day it is. Oftentimes it's just one run-on day, and so that's hard for romance and caring for ourselves and And I just love that because I think that's a great template and a framework. What are some other food cravings that can give us some hints to emotions?
Absolutely. I'll run through a couple others. So smooth, creamy foods sometimes indicate that our lives feel a little too rough and we're looking to smooth things out a little bit. For some people that's peanut butter, some people that's ice cream, and these are foods that sometimes, bringing that guilt and shame back in, we think of those foods sometimes as being less nourishing or less healthy than other foods. And so we kind of beat ourselves up instead of pausing and checking in with what emotion is this really indicating is coming up for me right now. It doesn't have to be that I have no willpower and I always eat ice cream. It may just be that I'm not doing a great job with confronting the emotions or acknowledging the emotions that I'm having. Sometimes warm foods indicate a longing for emotional warmth. And then another example is spicy foods. Some people really just want that spicy kick. And that can often mean that you're really looking for some sort of adventure or, think of the spice of life. You want to really spice things up. So in these kind of monotonous day-to-day experiences that we're having, that may be something that's coming up for some folks as well. And so I can, and again, that's just a template. One that I was thinking about for myself that I've explored is my food craving that tends to come up for me is I really like ice cream, but it's not the smooth, creamy ice cream. It's the stuff with the chunks in it. Yeah. I want as much chunkiness as possible. And I also think about the way I like to eat it. You were talking about with your Cheez-Its, pouring them into a bowl and taking them away and eating them. I get the whole half gallon of ice cream. I don't eat the whole half gallon because I'm in tune with my hunger cues and I know that this is an emotional craving, but I get the whole half gallon and I like to excavate the little pieces.
The cookie dough.
Yeah. Exactly. And I know, because I've done this work for myself, I know for me that those cravings occur on days when I've had a work project that I am stuck on, and it is a big project and I can't seem to break it down into smaller, more manageable pieces that feel like I can actually make progress on it. So for me, it's about the food that represents my ability to take something and break it down into individual little pieces and make progress on this big giant task half gallon of ice cream. So that's what that is for me.
That's great. That's such a great thought. Like I hadn't thought about those things being so connected, but they feel parallel. Like when you're talking about ice cream, for instance, same here is the kids have birthday cake ice cream from a local regional ice cream store called Brahms, and it's got little chunks of birthday cake in it. But that resonates with me for sure. But I think again, you're just saying, okay, these are some potential indicators to see really what's going on. And as much as I think I'm so self-aware, Mackenzie, I'm not. I need some of these kind of hints to go, yeah, it's been back to back to back to back to back all day, or I have been juggling technical support with my kids, today, and probably kind of want a reward or something, for that, sitting down with my ice cream.
Yeah, and then also to really highlight the function of food, not only for emotion regulation, or not only for as an emotional kind of mirror to look into, but also as a physiological substance. Food is chemicals, not just like, oh no, there's chemicals in my food, but food is like carbohydrates, proteins, fats. Those are all chemicals that change what's going on in our brain. They change the chemistry of our brain, and they do allow us to feel more calm. So if we can, or more, invigorated, maybe it really, depends on the food that you're eating. But if instead of kicking ourselves for giving in to our cravings, if we could instead maybe reframe this and say, oh my gosh, wow, look at how adaptive my psyche and my body are. I know that I need a pick-me-up, and look at me, I'm turning to food. It doesn't mean that your tool belt for coping skills may be a little wimpy. Like maybe we need to add things besides food to your coping skills tool belt. But, if that's what you've got in your tool belt, then man, you're using what you got.
So good. So there's a question that kind of comes back to a big subject I want to come back to when we're talking about leveling up and this. Oh man, it's really about guilt and shame. So Anonymous asked, I definitely resonate with the guilt and shame around food. It seems like there's never a right way to do it, especially now. I find that one message I hear a lot in social media is that I need to be supporting my local restaurants by ordering takeout. So where there used to be guilt about eating out too much pre-quarantine, now there's guilt about not supporting restaurants enough. So I'm wondering if anyone else is feeling this as well, and how do you strike that balance? But under this guilt and shame thing, I think you have a powerful message in this that we were talking about last night. And it was a word I didn't kind of think we would be talking about, or a phrase, I guess, but she said self-compassion and kindness related to we're in this rare, I mean, this is unprecedented, at least in my lifetime situation. And, that we put a lot of pressure on ourselves from like this Anonymous's comment, which I so appreciate, that there's even guilt about supporting local restaurants, So to her question, how do we strike that balance and how do we take better care of ourselves in that guilt and shame context?
Yeah, that's, your question is twofold there. The first one, as far as the logistics of how do we manage these competing values, I think values is the key word there, is really, what's most important to you at this point in time? Do you really value contributing to your local community? Maybe in that case, your choice is going to be that you do more eating out. If you value, let's say, saving money because maybe you're in a more challenging financial situation right now, maybe that value rises higher. And so, we all have values, and we're all at this point in time, we do ourselves a favor by holding those up to the light and saying, what's most important to me right now? It might be different than it was 2 months ago, and that's okay. Values change over time. So asking yourself, what's really important to me at this point in time in my life, and going along with what you find your highest values are right now. And then the second part of what you're asking about is that self-compassion. I think self-compassion can get integrated. I think we really should be integrating self-compassion into our lives in so many facets. And I think with food, in some of the ways we've just talked about, we can just be kinder to ourselves by acknowledging our humanity and acknowledging that as humans, we need to eat. We all make choices about what we eat. And those choices may change over time based on a lot of different situations. And also that, as you were saying, Corey, we may not be as self-aware as we think we are sometimes. And so you can use this time to tune into what your emotions are telling you as your food cravings pick back up. Did that kind of answer the question, you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing you said to me too last night, or the translation I should say I heard, is that you kind of gave me permission to not be so tough on myself during this whole thing. I mean, we talked about food, and that's one thing that, over and over is something I wrestle with. I can easily fall into perhaps overeating, those kind of tendencies for myself. But the other thing is like knowing, okay, I'm not exercising like I should. It's the shoulds, it's the shoulds that my inner voice kind of tells me, Corey, you should not be eating that Heath bar. Corey, you should be going out and exercising, doing push-ups or something. It's all the shoulds that are in my mind. And I think last night in particular, you spoke to that, and it was really helpful. And the word was like, you gave me permission to kind of like take it easy on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, turning as many of those shoulds into coulds as possible can make such a huge difference. That even just that simple reframe is key, really
Yeah,
key.
I like that. Should to could. Okay, should to
Mhm.
could.
Yeah, I could eat it. I could eat a Heath bar. Totally. I could. That's fine. I could eat these carrots. You've got lots of options. And,
Yeah,
beating ourselves up for picking one over the other just adds to the level of stress that we feel. And no one needs extra stress right now.
yeah. Okay, so Toby makes a comment that I want to talk about because I have pretty harsh judgmental language in my head about myself. I think turning the should into the could is really good, for me, probably taking some pressure off myself. But Toby mentions it took me a long time, and I've learned that I have a relationship with food. Sometimes it's a good relationship and sometimes not so good. And so can you talk about that judgmental relationship and this food's this necessary thing? We have to have food,
Mhm.
but that, it's not, like perhaps like alcohol. We don't need alcohol to sustain ourselves, but we happen to need food and water. So, can you talk about particularly the angle of the judgmental side for things too, of, some of the language we talk to ourselves about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and this goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of all the messages that are out there. There's lots of competition for our attention and for our dollars. I don't want to get political about it for sure, but there's a lot of marketing money out there in the world. And, and, and what resonates with us a lot is messages about whether things will make us healthier and whether things will make us just whether we're better people if we choose certain foods. Like, think about the organic food movement, or food, like local food movement. Really, we've got these different messages, and the anonymous comment earlier reflected that as well, that we want to be supporting the things that align with our values. But if we don't know what our values are, then we're going to have judgment, because we're going to be pulled in all the different directions to make the choice that might not actually be the best for us. And so it's easy to fall into judgment if we don't check in with our own values first and find out, what do I actually really want to be doing? Do I want to eat organic all the time? Maybe I do. Do I want to eat local all the time? Maybe I do, but maybe I don't. And once you can get clear on what your values are, then the food judgments don't hold so much power over you, because you've already kind of made your decision.
I love that you've anchored us back to internal things instead of external. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
much on social media, you can see and you go, oh man, if you just take social media for a second and go, this person is the happiest person in the world, right? But in reality, that's 0.001% of what they're actually curating, especially, I mean, I'm talking for myself. I curate specifically. I don't show the temper tantrums, the losing my temper sometimes, personally as a dad, or those type of things on social media. I share the, oh my God, that's picturesque moment of us having a little picnic on the towel, in the front yard.
Right.
And so I think that's so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Okay, so in the next, let me look at the comments real quick. And by the way, hit the Q&A button and ask Mackenzie your questions, and we'll get to those. Already some really great questions that have been posed today, and I really appreciate them. And again, I'm getting so much from this myself. So I'm going to switch gears now, Mackenzie, while people are posting in the Q&A button there. Let's talk about, like, my wife right before this webinar goes, we need to figure out a grocery run, what we need from the grocery store. And for me, it's like, oh man, if I get that, sleeve of Oreos, I'm gonna wipe them out in 24 hours, maybe 48. But there's anxiety that I get about that, and I think, what are some things we can approach grocery store to put some of those good things in? And I'll say it for myself. What are some good things I can put on my grocery list today when we go do that? That
Mm-hmm.
would help make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to pause and go back to the cravings piece that we talked about earlier,
Mhm.
because I actually would say put the Oreos on your list, because and I'm talking to anyone that's listening, what foods you're craving. Put them on
Yeah.
your grocery list this week and use this as a time to experiment with what your cravings mean to you. So, for
Mhm.
example, if Oreos are your thing, then then put them on your grocery list, bring them into your home. And next time you're craving them, just pause and tune in and say, what is this telling me? What do I actually need? And you may have to actually eat the Oreos to figure it out. You may have to figure out, how is it that I really am wanting to, like, do I want to just go in and pull 2 out, and then I want to go in and pull 2 more out? Like, how am I eating them? Or do I take the whole sleeve into my office and I eat them in secret? You know what, you may have to actually get in and eat the food to figure it out. So I'd say put the foods that you're craving on your list. But also, I think this is a great time to get creative and to branch out with food, and to try new things. And sometimes we're doing it because we have no choice, because the first things that we put on our grocery list are not there. But this is a good time to have some fun with food and to play with it a little bit, and go outside your comfort zone. Maybe try a new vegetable, or try a new grain that you wouldn't have tried before, but it's literally the only one left on the shelf. So don't get so locked into your grocery list that you end up walking away with nothing that that you can actually use. Because you were so like focused on getting your bananas. Well, guess what? All the bananas are gone. Or your bread. Well, it's all gone. So let yourself play a little bit.
So when my wife says, let's dig into our pantry instead of like loading up on more stuff, and I'm like, but I don't know if I like all that stuff. The word you said was creative. And so she's brought me into this world of loving cooking shows. And I think about Chopped. So you're saying like, go into the pantry and find some creative ways to pull out this turkey chili and something else. Or I'm trying to think what's in there. Maybe there's capers or some, I don't know, tomato paste that we haven't used in like 3 months.
Right.
So you're saying get in there and get creative with it?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And if that is, we're all kind of having to get experimental. Like, I can't go to, I may not be able to go to my, like go to all the regular places I would go to kind of get my creative needs out. Maybe I've got an art class that I usually go to, or a yoga class that I go to, that helps me to get some of those emotional needs met that I'm not really doing as much anymore. And so finding ways to express those emotions in creative ways is really crucial right now. And cooking or experimenting with food, because as you said, we all have to eat. We've all got to prepare food to put into our bodies. That hasn't changed. But the ways we do that are going to be different. We have some opportunities to get creative, and it doesn't mean that you have to start baking bread. I feel like those are the social media posts that I've seen, is that everyone's baking bread, or everyone is doing these like long drawn out cooking things. If that's your gig and you want to try that, and that's the way you want to get creative, go for it. But it can also be figuring out how to use the capers that are in your pantry, and getting in there and trying some new things. You'd be surprised at the nutritional value of some of those staple foods that we don't really give the time of day sometimes.
So have some fun with it, get creative with it, and maybe even challenge my wife to a Chopped competition.
Right. I think that would be really fun.
We can make it even crazier if we had our kids pick out the ingredients. I don't know if you watch
Right.
Chopped, but sometimes you're like, how did you pick these disparate things? Okay. I love the creativity part and having some fun with it. And all of this, there's a theme that's coming out to me, Mackenzie, which is use food. Use food. One, there's nourishment, to help us stay healthy and all that. But use it, one, to figure out some of the emotional cues your body, your life is giving you. Use it for fun. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. My wife really likes to cook, but the sense of going into the pantry, using that food to perhaps have a little fun, do a little gamesmanship and kind of thing. I really love that. I think that's a great theme, because I think so often I feel like, just sharing my own insight here, or not even my insight, but what I feel sometimes is that instead of me using food in those ways, feel like maybe I'm a slave to it. Like, okay, hey, I go in, man, I got to make my sandwich, but I've got these back-to-back meetings, or, the kids are hungry again, it's time for lunch or breakfast or whatever it is. And that's a tough part to it all.
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially if you're not just feeding yourself, then this gets it gets really tricky because yeah, food can be like, we can talk about how food is fun and how you can be creative with food and it can be delicious, but it can also be tedious. And so,
Yeah.
if you're one of those people whose life has gotten really busy, you may need to, your creativity may be, trying out some new frozen foods that you hadn't tried before, or it may be just making it work. Like,
Yeah.
not pushing yourself to get like to do the bread baking. This may not be the time for you to do that, but just like give yourself a break if this is not where you need to be right now.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay. So a question here. We're hearing a lot about social isolation as a necessary way to live. It makes sense to seek food to fill the void. What other options are there? I'm a peer support specialist and have a lot of clients that don't have internet access. Food is a good companion. Sometimes exercise doesn't feel like a viable option to people. So, so some thoughts on that about what are some other options to food. We've talked about some ways to have fun with food, get creative with food, and really use food to keep us kind of moving forward. What are some other options you see in your work too, or thoughts you have about that?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll share my thoughts on it. I'm certainly not an expert on, I'm not a therapist. And I'm not a coach of any type, but some things that I've seen my clients or even friends, or family use as ways to connect are to use technology in whatever dose is the right dose for you. We can certainly overdo it with technology. And sometimes if we're on our screens for work all day long, we're ready to get off of our screens at the end of the day. But like you can do a Netflix party. You can connect with your friends and your family across the world through watching a new and interesting show together on Netflix and going with a Netflix party. You can also do, if you've got a way to video chat, you can play games on, using your Zoom app or using FaceTime. Really building those activities in, and that's an easy Google search, games, especially these days, games that you can play using your social media or Zoom or FaceTime. But they're definitely out there. Our family really likes code names, and we'll get one camera set up on our code names board and we'll have everyone else playing from a distance. So that's been a really life-giving thing for us, to engage with our friends in new ways. It's also a good time to reach out to people that you might not be in touch with normally, and reconnect, rekindle some old relationships that haven't gotten as much attention as you would have been able to give them recently. If exercise also doesn't feel like a good option, I would also encourage y'all to be thinking of different ways that you can exercise. It doesn't necessarily mean going out on a walk or a run. It can mean like a 5-minute dance party in your kitchen with or without your kids or your wife, or it can be, like a 30-second, kickboxing moment in your chair between those Zoom meetings where you just kind of get your blood pumping and flowing. You get some fuel to your brain, and it helps to reinvigorate in a way that food can do. But if you're ready to stop turning to food to get those needs met, get creative with the ways you're moving your body. Do a handstand, like if you're super mobile, like try some new things, do some stretches. It doesn't have to be a marathon. It can be just small activities.
Yeah, I realized my wife didn't know chess, and I'm definitely a hardcore nerd. And so in high school, I played chess during lunch. And so talk about analog type activity. And so we started trying to teach the kiddos, and me teach the kiddos and my wife chess. And that's just a nice little analog game. And I really didn't realize how many board games we had in the house. So I'll have to look up code names, though. I hadn't heard of that one before.
Good one.
Okay, back to kind of your specialty, and thank you for that too. I think that's great that you shared your own experiences and how you can do that in social isolation when, if you have access to a phone and calling people or, FaceTiming, that kind of stuff. I think that's so valuable. So the question is, I'm missing my produce and I'm concerned about the transmission of COVID. The produce isn't something that I can stock up on. There are new fears that we're dealing with. How do you suggest coping and purchasing properly? I'm tired of canned and frozen food, but it feels safer now. I'm also a vegetarian. I get protein through beans, cheese, and nuts. Meaning he can't stock up on some of those things. But so coping, we've kind of talked some of those skills, but purchasing. So I'm in the grocery store and making good decisions. With, I say good, you told me also, hey, permission, like Oreos are on the thing, but I'd like to have some base when I do have some snacks to go through and find some nutritious type things and I think we're talking about the greens. He talked specifically about produce, but your thoughts and tips on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that what we know about food safety at this point in time is that it's not a great vector for these viruses, or the virus that we're really especially worried about right now. The virus doesn't last very long on that produce, so you can bring those foods home if you feel more comfortable. Like if you've got, let's say, a fruit or vegetable that you can peel, you might select peelable things at this point if you want to get those outside, the outside skin off. If that makes you feel more comfortable, but also a good wash in the sink. You don't even really need to use soap, but do run under some hot water your produce. And you can also, because the virus doesn't live on, especially on food, for very long, more than a day or so, you can let that produce sit in your refrigerator, or if it's produce that can sit out on the counter, you can let it sit out on the counter. And then, some of those greens wilt pretty easily, but using them in an application like a soup, or they might not be fresh enough to use in a really nice, beautiful salad, but you can use them in some different applications like sauteed, or again, a soup, or, cooked into a grain dish. So that's a way to use some of that old produce that maybe you weren't comfortable using right when you brought it home from the store, but you're ready to use it a few days later when you know that any viral contaminants on that produce have been, they're no longer living.
That's great to know. Okay, so if Jane asked, if you haven't done so already, can you talk about cooking for one? So and I feel for our single community members that are, I even have a friend that lives in an apartment. So I have a little bit of, land for us to go outside and actually not be cooped up in a small environment, but, cooking for one, and then, the whole single person, somebody at home trying to, do right.
Corey, I think I lost your video. But while Corey's coming back, I can start talking about cooking for one, to answer the question. So cooking for one is definitely, it can be different from cooking for a larger group of people, and it can be intimidating, but I don't think that it has to be. Cooking for one can be as simple as just breaking a larger recipe down into smaller quantities, which is, might involve some math, but if you can cut your recipe that's supposed to be used for 4 into if you can cut it into fourths, then now it's a recipe that is made for 1. Also, finding recipes that you really enjoy, so that you're willing to eat the leftovers that you might have in the fridge if you use a recipe that cooks for 2 or more. Soups often make really large quantities, and those can be, those can get boring if they're just the same things that you're eating over and over. But you can, if you've got freezer space, you can freeze soup and pull it out from time to time, or you could try reducing the recipe, or that may just not be what you want to do right now. But I think that cooking for one doesn't have to be an intimidating activity. Again, it can be as simple as just reducing your recipe. Oh, Corey, we've got you back. There we go.
Hey, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Um,
I covered cooking for one while you were gone.
Excellent. Thank you. This talk about quarantine.
I
Oh
know.
man, and technology. Okay,
Right.
good deal. Thank you. I was trying to go back and find our router and see what happened. Okay, good. Thank you so much. I'll listen to the recording later on about that.
Hmm.
Okay, so specifically, someone also asked, since you already covered cooking for one, thank you so much, Mackenzie. You're a pro. Can you elaborate back on the sweet, spicy, or crunchy foods and our feelings and emotions for that? Someone might have missed that too, and I think that's important because we go back to self-awareness and what's going on underneath the surface. So, would you mind
Hmm.
sharing that again?
Absolutely. I'll just run through the list that I have here. So sweet foods tend to indicate that we're missing out on some sort of sweetness in our life, whether it's that we need to ask for that from the people around us, like seeking out connection from the kind people that we have in our life, or asking other people to give us a little bit more of that type of attention. Or it can be that we're not being sweet enough to ourselves. We're not being kind enough to ourselves or integrating enough self-compassion. But think about what that sweetness really, all of these, as we'll go through this list, all of these you can really dig into more if you describe the food that you're craving to yourself as if you've never eaten it before. So imagine, like with the Oreos or with the Cheez-Its, what is it about those Oreos that like really does it for you? And describe that to yourself, and you'd be amazed how easily the metaphors translate. Just the words that you use to describe that particular food can tell you exactly what it is you need. So that's an example for sweet foods. Smooth and creamy foods usually mean that we're needing some more smoothness or some more ease in our life and want things to be smoothed out. Think about what things in your life feel like they're too hard or too rough, too bumpy. Crunchy and salty foods are usually about unexpressed anger or frustration. Think about who or what you might be angry or frustrated with, and try, as with all this stuff, really experiment with what happens when you try to address the emotion rather than just subconsciously eating the feeling. Um, Warm foods often are about lacking emotional warmth. So sometimes there's some overlap with those sweet foods and the warm foods, but there's some nuance there. So explore that for yourself. Spicy foods are usually about missing stimulation or excitement, or feeling like you need a little bit more zing in your life, and or a change even. Like, are you looking for a change? That can be spicy foods. And then chocolate is usually about sexual or romantic or sensual, really sensory cravings. What are you not getting in those areas?
Okay, so I can tell you, going back to the spicy foods, I've got enough seeing in my life. Internet going down, kids coming in. I can even hear the classroom stuff in the background. And welcome to quarantine, people, right?
Right. Yeah. So that would be, some, like, we could probably add to this list bland foods, like the
Mm,
basic stuff. Like, all I want is potatoes. That could go a lot of different directions. Do you want them because they're warm? Do you want them because they're bland? Do you want them because they're salty and crispy? How do you take your potatoes? So
mm,
look into that for yourself, and you'll find what those foods mean for you.
yep. Okay, thank you for that, going back to that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on the nutrition angle, we hear a lot about this phrase, particularly with eating circles, is portion control. So the question is asked: how do you address portion control?
Okay. Well, I really function from working with folks on building their eating intuition. So that often when we do that, we start with, that really assumes that we all have within ourselves a sense of how much food we need to eat and what foods we need to eat. Um, Intuitive eating is a skill that can be challenging to develop because as we've talked about today, we have so many emotions that go into our food choices, and we have to get conscious of those emotional food cravings. But it also can be challenging because you have to tune into your hunger cues, and you have to reckon with the fact that maybe you don't like vegetables, or maybe you don't like, like maybe your vegetarianism isn't working out for you. So you have to kind of come clean to yourself about the reality of your preferences. Maybe you get hungrier than you really think you should get, or maybe you're eating more than you really actually need to be eating. So you have to come clean to yourself about your reality. So portion control, I think, is kind of a, I think that looks at eating in a backwards way. It says that we need to look outside of ourselves to figure out what is right for us, instead of tuning inward and accepting that we have within us what we need to make the right food decisions for ourselves. And that those decisions may change, going back to values like we talked about before. What do you value right now? It may be different than it will be in the future, than it was a few months ago. So your food choices may change, and the amount of food you're eating may change. Your appetite may be less if you're not moving as much, or it may be more if you're moving more. So portion control, I really would encourage folks to reframe and allow themselves to figure out what portions are right for them in the moment, and what types of foods they're really interested in. And that also may not be something you have access to at this point in time.
Yep. Okay, everybody, if you have a question for Mackenzie, please hit the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom app there, and we'll talk. We have about 10 more minutes in today's webinar, and I'm really thankful. There's already been some amazing takeaways for me. While people are asking questions, I want to address something too. Stress. Let's just camp out in stress. I mean, right now, it's like, okay, the internet went down. It is juggling a lot of things. Someone said, I come from the tech industry, and a lot of tech people work from home. Well, this is not really, I've heard it said, this is working home with everybody in the same space, and, kids that ordinarily would be at school here trying to do school. No matter how you shake it out, and it's not just mine, there is elevated stress in this, from fear and worry about what's going on with the world, the economy, all of these type of things. Can you talk about, again, back to stress and its relationship with food and feelings and eating and all that?
Absolutely. So stress plays, and this also goes into the question we were just talking about with portion control / intuitive eating. Stress, not only through our emotions, but also through the physiological effects of stress, plays a big role in how the way we eat. It can affect our appetite. Some people, when they get really stressed, just their appetite tanks. Other people, their appetite increases, or they're using food as a way to kind of not feel so stressed, or change their brain chemistry so that they've got more of a dopamine hit happening more frequently, so that they don't feel that same level of stress. So stress also can cause us to feel really tired. It can cause us to have less energy to feel like we really can expend on some of the creativity with food that we talked about, or the physical activity, getting out and moving. So stress just like kind of drags our body down. It can affect our rate of weight gain. It can, really enhance your body's, the functions that your body has, where it wants to hold on to body fat, because your body doesn't know why you're stressed. It just knows that you are chronically. And so it wants you to hold on to body fat, because it doesn't really know, you could be stressed because you're in a period of famine, or you're getting ready to go into a period of famine. And so you may be more likely to put on more weight during this quarantine time, even if you are moving more, or even if you're just home and out of work. If your stress is present, it's going to have just all these little tendrils that snake out into your life. And so that's where that self-compassion again comes in, to say, I just have to acknowledge that even though I don't want to be, or even though I feel like I shouldn't be, I am stressed. and engaging in some activities that maybe are new and different for you based on what's available to manage your stress, to practice deep breathing, to do some stretching, to get creative with your movement, or the ways you interact in community, so that you're less susceptible to all those effects of stress. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. In everything we're talking about, you keep bringing us back to anchoring in ourselves, it feels like. And what is our body telling us from value? What do we value? I love that reframing of portion control, particularly, or paying attention to the things we're craving and pulling in as a way to kind of anchor in what's going on with us and how we take care of ourselves. And I think this whole thing, this is why ILC has several webinars, by the way, coming up about how to basically take care of yourself in quarantine. Experts at ILC are sharing their expertise and experiences, just like you are, Mackenzie, to help us kind of take better care about yourself. And I think I just go back to the running theme here is using food to have a little fun and joy in your life by being creative. Going back to understanding the cues that we use food for related to our emotional state, and then giving ourselves permission to not carry so much guilt and shame around. So it's been really good. If you have any last questions for Mackenzie, please post those in the Q&A app and we'll get to those. Okay, here, sorry, I missed these, Mackenzie. What are your thoughts, Anonymous asks, about terms like quarantine 15 and fattening the curve? I feel like those terms have instilled a lot of fear around weight gain for me. So even though I'm eating better and exercising more, I feel like it's coming from a place of fear. So definitely,
Yeah.
I've heard that too. Quarantine 15 or COVID-19, the freshman 15 kind of parallel there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I love, Anonymous, thank you for asking that question. And I love that, whoever you are that asked that question, that you're aware that those messages are really instilling fear. And fear and stress, that's one of the, we're doing all these things to try to boost our immune systems, whether it's eating better or exercising or, all of our other self-care activities. We're doing all those things to try to reduce our vulnerability to contracting a virus, or enhance our ability to really continue to live our life amidst all these changes. But the fear can just so knock us off our feet and can so influence our choices around food and movement in a way that then turns those choices that we make into chores. They go from choices to chores,
Mm-hmm.
and that is no way to live right now. And so I just want to acknowledge the awareness that those of us who are aware of those messages are having, that the fear of weight gain at this point in time is just all over social media. And if you can come back to your truth, what do I want to be doing right now? Am I actually exercising in the ways or in the amounts of times that I want to? Am I eating in the ways or the amounts that I really think are best for my body? And using that fear as a signal to then come back to your true, authentic self and values.
There's that word again that I love that you kind of anchoring us back on, which is, what do you value? Do you value, from food or extra, whatever that is? What are the things that come from within, other than the ones that come outside that try to penetrate, our inside and inner world? I really love that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, one last question, and thank you so much, everyone, for being here today, and Mackenzie too. But last question, Mackenzie, from Anonymous: what should you do if you feel physically full or even have nausea, yet you still feel compelled to eat? Great question there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that goes back into some of the ways we've talked about managing those and exploring those food cravings that you might have. Anytime that happens, really, pull out a journal, pull out something to, maybe it's a note on your, or the notes app on your phone or something, but give yourself a minute to tune in and pause. And we talked a little bit yesterday, Corey, about boredom, and that hasn't come up so much today, but I'll bring that in as well.
Yes, please.
Sometimes we kind of kick ourselves for the bored eating, and sometimes boredom is actually what we're trying to use food to fix, so that we kind of bring some excitement back in. But sometimes also boredom The reason we eat when we're bored is because there's a feeling that comes up when we get bored, an emotion. And that's actually what we're trying to use food to push away. So use that moment when that craving or that compulsion, to use what I think your word was, to continue eating, and tune into what emotion is present for you. And don't be afraid of it. It doesn't have any power. It's just an emotion. The power that the emotions have is the way we react to them. So change your reaction, react differently, check in with what's going on for you instead of repeating the same patterns of going back to food to address the feeling that it doesn't actually end up fixing in the end.
That's excellent. Okay, we could expand this and keep talking, and that's why we're gonna have to have you come back and share your wisdom and insight, Mackenzie, because what an amazing subject. And I already feel better because there's actionable plans for me to take the pressure off myself, use food positively, productively from my values within. So I appreciate you so much, Mackenzie, being here today. And for those of you that attended live, thank you so much for being here and your amazing questions for this very talented person. integrativelifecenter.com is where we'll post the recordings afterwards. Be sure you're signed up on Facebook. We've got a Facebook page, integrativelifecenter.com. You can look at the little social links and go back out to that. Twitter, Facebook, and even LinkedIn. So we'll be posting the recording for this shortly, very, very soon, I should say. So thanks again, Mackenzie, and thanks everybody for being here today.
Thanks, y'all.